Welcome to the Christian Men at Work podcast, where I interview men from all walks of life with varying job titles who have one thing in common. They are all choosing daily to live out their Christian faith through their work, and because of that, they are leading, prospering, glorifying God, and experiencing joy and purpose in their work. And you can too. Men at Work, welcome to episode 219. Today we're going to talk with Brett Snodgrass, who is a full-time real estate investor. He runs a men's ministry called Iron Deep. He's written a fiction book, and he also has a very powerful testimony. And so we've got a lot to talk about, and we'll cover it all here. Let's get right to it.
Well, hey, Brett, thanks so much for joining the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, David. Thank you so much for having me on the show, man. Excited.
I'm excited too. I'm looking forward to talking about your career and your book. But let's start out like I usually do and just ask you to tell us a little bit about your childhood and when and how you came to faith in Christ.
Yeah. No, thank you. Love sharing the story. So I am born and raised in Indiana. My parents were both teachers. My dad was a high school teacher, and he was also a high school basketball coach. So my childhood was pretty much like the movie Hoosiers, if you've seen that before. I was a basketball player, Dad was a coach, and I spent pretty much my whole life playing basketball here in Indiana. And I actually got a full-ride scholarship to a small Indiana school called Huntington University. It's a small Christian school in northern Indiana, so I got to go there and play. And, growing up, really, my parents, we went to church, regularly, but I was a child that, I was kind of, getting into some things that I probably shouldn't have gotten in. I was really chasing girls at a very young age, got introduced to partying and alcohol at a young age, and that really just kind of trickled into even college. I went to a Christian school, but I was in the party crowd, and I was really just there to play basketball. I wasn't there, for God or anything like that, really just there for myself and my own life, my own selfishness to play basketball. And that went through college and then really just trickled all the way through my 20s. So I got an elementary education degree because my parents are both teachers. So I tried that out for about a year teaching and just decided, you know what, this really just wasn't for me. And kind of, went from job to job for a few years there and ended up in real estate. It was actually what I do now. I got introduced to a real estate investor. And then I just started chasing money. And really, so I think the whole moral of the story was I was always chasing something, whether it was my basketball career and trying to be the best at that, or girls, or money. And I really just didn't quite get it until I was 30 years old. And I remember the story like it was yesterday. I actually had a child at that time, had a child out of wedlock. And I was 30 years old. She was about 2 years old. And just everything just started hitting the fan. I was making a lot of money, but my relationships were completely damaged and broken from some of my own selfishness. And I remember I was sitting in my big house with my daughter at that time, and just, what is this? What is this whole thing about? What is life all about? And that's when I really started seeking something bigger than myself. And it took about 6 months of wrestling, with some of these questions. Is this story really real? And ended up giving my life to Christ about 30 years old. So it took that whole length of time. That was a long-winded answer to your story, but took 30 years. I'm 43 now, so I've been walking with the Lord for 13 years, and it's really how I came to Christ.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So, how did things change after that, both in terms of your relationships and your career?
Yeah, no, definitely. Pretty much everything changed. Again, I think all the way up to that point, I was really just living for myself. Anything that brought me pleasure, I wanted to participate. And that could be a whole world of different things, whether it was alcohol, women, drugs, money, success, recognition, anything, power. I just wanted to participate in the things that would bring Brett pleasure. So from then on, I just realized, there's a bigger story to all of this. And so So really what things changed is, my selfishness started to become a little bit more selfless. I started to think about my daughter, obviously, a lot more, and how, to model for her what a life would look like. I called it my honeymoon with Jesus for the first, 2, 3, 4 years. I got involved with everything from men's ministries to these retreats called the Great Banquets that I would go to prison ministries, how else I could serve the kingdom. I was just all in. And then a few years later, I actually got introduced to my wife now, and, probably the greatest gift that God has ever given me, because, just a quick story just about her is we started dating and met her through some friends at our church and sat her down. And I just wanted to be completely authentic, completely raw with her, and just tell her about, my story and everything. And I told her it all, and I didn't leave anything out. And then she told me her story where she gave her life to Christ at an extremely young age, and tried to really obey Him throughout her life. She actually saved herself for her wedding night, for our wedding night, basically. So that was just the type of woman that she was. So got married to her. We've been married 11 years now, and now we have 3 other beautiful children. So we have 4 total. I was in the real estate business, and that started to change. I just started serving and loving other people. So really, everything started to be about the kingdom. I'm not perfect by any means, but how can I serve the kingdom more with my life, with my family, with my business? So I started to just point with that singular purpose in everything that I did. And again, we've had some bumpy rides along the way here, 13 years now, but it's just been, obviously the best decision I've ever made. I raised my family in that way. I do my business that way. And so pretty much everything changed, I think, when really the only thing that changed was really the inside of Brett's heart with his relationship to his designer, his creator, with Christ. So
how's your relationship with your first daughter that you had?
Yeah. Well, she is now almost 17. So time flies by, and we've had quite the ride together. So one of the things is, never got married to her mother, but her and her mother we have a great relationship. We've split time with her half the time for the entire ride. Now she's 17, and one of the things was we all lived in Indianapolis, and then her mom and they wanted to move to Fort Wayne, so we came too, to have still that relationship with my daughter. So is it perfect? Any dad with a 17-year-old, we have some ups and downs, but I think the word is just intentional. I've tried to be extremely intentional with her. We've done daddy-daughter camps multiple times. We did a daddy-daughter camp out in California last year called JH Ranch, one of the most magnificent things I've ever done with her. Just again, trying to build that relationship, try to date her on a weekly basis. She drives now, so I don't see her as much. So just, but we have that weekly or at least every other week date time that we get to spend together. And then just trying to mentor her, to love her, to coach her into the young woman that she is. So I would say, obviously we look at ourselves like, oh, I could do better. But, just through that, it's just been one of the most magnificent relationships, obviously, through it all.
Thanks for sharing that. It's just a reminder that, we're forgiven, but there are consequences, but God can work good out of everything, and we just move forward, and so I just applaud you for that. So very inspiring story. Thanks for sharing. Well, let's get into some of the things you're involved in. You have a ministry called Iron Deep. Mm-hmm. What is that all about?
Yeah, definitely. So, I've always wanted to. So one of the things is, I came to Christ later in my life. I had some men surround me during that time to encourage me, to sharpen me. mentors in my life, whether it was a small group at my church, whether it was through some sort of ministry like the Great Banquet that I mentioned, or the prison ministries of hanging out with some of these guys serving together. Always been gravitating towards kind of men's groups. But I've also been a businessman throughout most of my life. I've been a real estate investor now for 17, 18 years. So I've also been around other groups of business guys that have influence, that have wealth. And I've been around that circle, and I've been able to see a lot of that. So really what Iron Deep was born, a couple years ago now. I wanted to really just develop a group for business owner men, that they could come, they could be, take off their masks, they could be honest with each other, that it would be a safe place in order to do that. And we would sharpen each other. We would help each other grow. Number one, in our faith. How can we develop more intimate relationship with Christ? How can we encourage each other to do that? And in other areas of our life too. The three main areas are faith, like I just said. That's number one, total surrender to Christ. And number two is our family. And family extends beyond just our homes, but we call each other, the brotherhood of the group, or maybe there's other deep relationships that you call family. How can we strengthen those? And so family is the second one. And then also in our businesses, that I think, God gave us certain talents. He gave us certain resources to use. So we help each other grow in our businesses. And what does that look like to be a business leader as a Christian? How do we lead that well in this world? So those are the three areas that Iron Deep's really all about. So we have events, we have retreats, we have one-day events. We're getting ready to launch kind of a smaller group mastermind of guys that really want to do life together. And that's really what it is. So it's business guys of men that come together, and it's Iron Deep.
Well, can you provide some examples from you and your members about what this looks like in specific practice? So you guys have events. Do you have like small groups that meet on a regular basis in addition to coming together with large groups? Or I guess you might say, are there some ways that you could say that make this different than other ministries that are out there?
Yeah, definitely. So Iron Deep is, it's pretty new. So, and this is also, I'm a bivocational, and I'm not a trained pastor, and it's not really a church. It's really just an organization. But we started off we've had a few, we call them Men's Awakenings. They're 3-day intensive retreats. That's kind of where it starts. So one of them we had in Utah in the Rocky Mountains. So typically we'll rent out a cabin. Everyone sleeps under one roof. So it's not like a campground or anything like that. Everyone sleeps under one roof, typically in some sort of, just wondrous of God's creation. So the first one we had in the Rocky Mountains. The second one we had in northern Georgia. It's about 25, 30 guys. So we get there, 3-day intensive retreats. And it really just accelerates the intimacy with the Father and each other, those 3 days, right? So we walk out of there really getting to know each other at a very deep level. So that's how one is different. And then from there, now we're starting to launch sort of small group mastermind groups. So these are structured paid subscriptions for business owner men that want to sharpen each other in a deep way in these three areas. They want to grow in their faith, they want to grow in their family and their relationships, and then they want to grow in their businesses. So we get together. Typically, these guys sometimes are from all over. So we get together 4 or 5 times a year. We also do different calls, Zoom calls in between those types of events. And it's very structured. It's very, trying to help each other grow in these certain areas. So that's a little bit how it's different. So we start off with the intensive to get to know each other super well, but then really doing life together in these small groups is where we want to go and to grow in these areas. And I'd say the difference between maybe church and maybe small groups is that maybe just those 3 areas is the focus. How do you apply, in those specific areas? And I think the other difference is, having some sort of that big business type of background. So it's guys coming from like-mindedness of not only leading families, but also leading employees, right? I think is another difference. So.
Cool. Any tips that you want to offer after doing this for a little while? I mean, it's a huge undertaking to launch something new like this. What have you learned that maybe you didn't expect after working through developing a ministry like this for some time?
Yeah. I mean, I've asked some of those same sorts of questions. The two things that probably come to mind that I got advised was, number one is just to take it slow. One thing's I've just been I've been thinking about this thing for a long time, but I've just been kind of letting it marinate. And I don't want like a ministry to be a mistress, right? I mean, I think you guys have done that they've put that maybe above their family and certain things. And I think you got to do what God calls you to do. But I don't know if I don't think that's biblical, right? So I don't, so number one, just to take it slow. So that's what I've been doing. And number two is just to team. Team is everything, right? In these things too. So one thing that I think is different at Iron Deep is that this isn't the Brett show. And I've been trying to be very intentional about that, where, and I don't mean any disrespect by any of this means, but a lot of times, when you go to church, it's typically, on a platform, you listen to one speaker every week and you get his experience and his stories, and you take that home and hopefully apply it somewhere in your life. That's typically the church experience. And with Iron Deep is, it really is just a team. There's a lot of voices, a lot of connection. This isn't like, Brett's up there teaching all the time. It's really about encountering God, right? And how do you really do that and build that relationship with him? And then how do you build that connection with these other guys, and how do you talk with them, and how do you relate to them? And so a lot of it is, face-to-face fellowship or one-on-one solitude with God. There's a lot of different variations to what we're doing. And it's not just the same. You go, you listen, you consume, and maybe you do something with it, but pretty much a lot of times people don't. So I think that's just some of the differences. My advice, again, I think take it slow, put the team in place. It is a huge undertaking. Whenever you start something, it's just huge. It's like it takes a long time to get that merry-go-round going, and whether that's a ministry, whether that's a business, and a lot of times, we can get in that trap of, looking at maybe some of these other things going on and comparing your 1 year of doing it to their 20, and like, how come I can't, how come we're not doing that? But I think also having the perspective is we're all for that singular purpose, right? I mean, we're not competing. I mean, we're all for the singular purpose for the kingdom. And I probably just rambled a lot, but that's some of the things I got. So
no, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, even if someone's not starting a ministry necessarily. Although I think a lot of our listeners, are venturing out in different areas in that way. So I always love to get tips on that. So
yeah.
Well, let's talk about this book, because a lot of times, sometimes I interview people who've written books, and I interview people who have ministries. Not often that someone who's done both. So I've written a small book. I know what it takes to write a book. So, and what is unique about you is that you wrote a fiction novel.
Yeah.
Which was very good. I read through it quickly and highly recommend it. But so why did you choose to write a fiction novel instead of a nonfiction book? I mean, there's a lot of topics under this category of men's ministry and business that you could have written a nonfiction book. Why'd you decide to write an allegory or a fiction book?
Yeah. No, that's the question. I like it. I've been asked before, and most people in my position that we're going to write a book, whether it's a business book or if a pastor or anyone writes a Christian type of book, typically, they go the nonfiction route, and you go to the bookstore and countless nonfictions. There's also Christian fiction books, but typically not maybe like this, I guess. So I love to write stories, and I love to tell stories. Jesus told a lot of stories, and I think that people can relate to stories, right? That's why public speakers use stories. If you wrote a nonfiction book, there'd be a lot of stories in it. So I said, instead of writing a lot of stories, why don't I just write a story and bring people into the story about a character? Maybe they can relate to this particular character. And I wanted to maybe do some things with the particular character that maybe wasn't Brett's life. Many of the things in Nolan Banks's character might have been some experiences through my own particular life, but I wanted to be able, to play with that a little bit. And I love, I've read some allegories that have really impacted my life, and a lot of them have been turned into movies, and that was just something that I thought was maybe unique, was a little different. I love to get really creative with my mind. I loved, even as a kid, to do skits and to do theater types of things. Even though I was a basketball player and a jock, I love to put on that creative mind. So this was really something that Brett loved to do, just to get into that kind of dreamlike world of kind of creating the story and praying with what God would want to put on these particular pages. And so honestly, it was more of a passion, fun project for myself. And, the risk was, would anyone read an allegory? Because if you're anything like me, I don't read a lot of fictional types of books, but the ones that I have read have really impacted my life. And I think the response was that people could really take themselves into this story. And that's been the response. So that's just, the direction we went.
How was the process? It sounds like because of just your bent and your approach to things, it maybe came maybe more easily for you than somebody else. I mean, how long did it take to write it? And was it really fun, or was it a mix of fun and just the discipline of getting it done?
I'm like, I'm probably not a very, I don't want to say I'm not like disciplined, but I like change, and routine sometimes is a little bit harder for me. I love new different types of things. So a lot of times these big projects like this, I might start and then not finish. And that's what a lot of people do. I mean, this is an extremely large project. It took me about 6 months to write out the first draft. And this is, putting pen to paper at least every day, or if not every other single day, right? And it's, writing a couple of pages a day, sometimes. So that's what it is. But even the before I even started really writing the book, it was 30 days of kind of dreaming about it, outlining different things, character formation, like just trying to think about who do I even want in the particular book. A lot of that, right? And so then I started writing, and it took about 6 months to write. And then you think you're done. And then it was about a year later before it actually came out for people to buy it. It's because you got the editing, the publishing, the cover, the foreword. You got all these different elements, and then you got to think about, okay, now I got to finish. Now how am I going to get people to know about the book? Now the whole marketing comes in. So, which I haven't, I'm doing podcast, things like that, but I have a lot of other things going on. So it is an extremely large project. Number one, was it fun? Yes, it was some very fun, intimate times with the Lord, writing this particular book, sitting in my basement, 5 a.m., just, what do you want me to say today? And just some intimate times with him. So that was a lot of fun, mixed in with a lot of stressful times, because I do want to finish it. When you're on page 50 and you think, oh, I got 8 more chapters to go. Like, how am I going to do this? Yeah, there's some definitely some stressful times. Like, man, I don't want to do this. I probably threw in the towel, almost threw in the towel like 50 times. But I'm glad I didn't, because sometimes there was 500 crappy words that came out, but sometimes there was 500 words that were pretty cool, pretty good. And I can look back now and read my own book and just imagine, like, I don't even know how I got to it, but it's just really just that daily discipline of getting the job done page after page. And so fun mixed with, some anxiety and stress. But am I glad I did it? Yes. I mean, I'm very glad that I have something that is evergreen, right? I mean, something I can pass down to my kids and they can read through, some of the stories. So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate giving that whole overview of that. I think that's a very real assessment of what the process was like, and it's inspiring to me, because I've been putting off writing a fiction book forever, and now I have a daughter who wants to write, and so we're kind of challenging each other. So that was inspiring. So thank you.
Yeah. No, you.
Well, I love the story. I want to pull a few comments out from the story without giving the whole plot away. But let me, the first one is a comment from Papa, who represents God the Father. And he says at one point to Nolan, isolation is a mere escape, a way to distract oneself from the problems and struggles of life. But solitude, on the other hand, is intentional and requires engagement. Now, Nolan's first trial includes solitude. What are some specific examples, in your opinion, of how men isolate themselves, why they do that, and how it's damaging to them and others, and how that's different from true solitude?
Yeah. No, this is something that, I mean, I've battled with, and I'm sure a lot of men out there have battled with. I don't know about you, but if I am, struggling with something, or I am hiding something, or, the whole book is called The Secret War Within. So you can really see the inner turmoil and secrets and battles that the main character Nolan struggles with. And some of it's darkness, and men, they hide it, right? They don't talk about it, and they just isolate. Maybe they isolate in some of their sins. That, again, they don't want to talk. No one knows about really what's going on. No one knows about what's going on in their private life, and they just hide all of that. Maybe they isolate and they just ignore some of these things going on in their life, some of these problems. So they just stay distracted. And Henry Thoreau says that some men live lives of quiet desperation. So they just live these quiet, desperate lives, mental illness or depression or anxiety. And no one knows about it. And it's just really kind of sad. They don't have anyone to turn to. They don't have a lot of close friends that they can really be open about. Most of their conversations revolve around work, or money, or sports, or the grill, or whatever. And they just don't get real. They don't get real honest with people, and they just isolate. Maybe they go off to their work. That's why men work themselves to death, right? They just want to be distracted. That's why they want to turn the game on. They want to go out with their buddies and drink a beer. And they just want to talk about fun and pleasure and distractions. And that's just the way they live their lives, and they live their lives completely like that. So that's just some of the ways they isolate. Or if anything like me, that if you start feeling some of these different things, that you really start just isolating wherever is your place, and you don't want to be around people, and you just live in your own selfish little world. So that's quite different than what God calls us to. And if you read the Bible, even Jesus himself went and he spent time with the Father. He spent time in conversations with the Father, in solitude, in engagement with Him, that he intentionally went to the mountain to spend some time in prayer, or maybe he took a couple of people with him certain times. But there was engagement, there was conversation, there was some intentionality to it, that he didn't try to escape the world. He didn't try to distract himself. And many times after these certain times when he intentionally went into solitude, he did something huge afterward. He was getting ready to make a big decision, whether it was calling his followers or calling his disciples, or whether it was the time that he would sacrifice himself. Like, he was getting ready to do something big in his life. So before he knew he was getting ready to do that big thing, he went intentionally into solitude with his Father. So that's the big difference. So I think many men, if you look at your own life, look at my own life, many times we isolate to escape, and we hardly ever intentionally go away to engage with the Father, to spend intentional time in solitude. So I think if you can learn to reverse that and just think about it a little bit differently, that's what he wants, and that's how Christ modeled for us. So, yeah.
Well, a big part of the book was dealing with the common problems of lust and greed, things that you hear about in men's ministries if you seek them out, but you don't generally hear about them in church very much. And particularly the challenges that are associated with those. Why do you think the church just has a problem dealing with those issues very well?
Yeah, that's just a great question, honestly. I think it's, again, in men's ministries, this is some of the things that I believe men really struggle with. I mean, if you really look at the stats and the statistics, it's just astonishing, the struggles with pornography, with lust. Even if you're not fully in the deep end of pornography, it's still a battle for every man in the world is coming after you hard with it. They know your triggers, and they're just coming after it in an extreme way. And they've been doing that for years. Greed is something that we don't talk about a whole lot. And I was listening to a pastor talk about just greed, and he said, a lot of people have came into my office about struggling with certain sins or lust, but no one thinks that they struggle with greed. And that's just something that people don't think that they struggle with. But it's a very common struggle. Just that whole selfishness of our human nature. I wish that we would just talk about these things more. I think we just need to be open about these struggles. We need to be just honest and truthful. I think maybe they just maybe they're afraid, because the audience, they want to just soften up the topic a little bit so everyone can, listen, and they don't have to be embarrassed. Or some people, might not want to hear certain things. And I think, again, that's maybe what Iron Deep, why men have gravitated towards it, is just because, we don't soften the script, and we want to be truthful and be honest. If you're really struggling with this, let's just lay it out. Let's just lay our cards on the table. This is what it is. And let's just talk about this stuff. So I wish that, church would really open the doors to that. And I think, again, that's what the book goes into, and you can see. And one of the other things, fiction versus nonfiction, that I really thought was interesting is, again, you go to men's ministries and men will talk about these certain things, but we're hardly ever in the room when maybe they're really struggling with it. And so in the book, you can really see Nolan struggling like hard with this stuff. So I think that's where the emotional, tug comes in, because you can really see him, just, battling with these different sins in his life. And I think that's what really resonates with men.
Yeah, and I've been in a group of men over the last year, and have developed a lot of relationships, and I've gotten to the point where I've seen into the details of the struggles that men have, and they've seen into the details of me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a critical barrier you kind of have to pass. In other words, for years, I would go to Saturday men's breakfast and, I'd hear good teaching on the theory of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
But until you really get to know men and you get vulnerable and you learn to trust each other, which is hard to do in church because, people know each other, people's wives know each other's wives, and it's
Right.
hard to really get real with other men. And so I think these parachurch organizations like yours are really just serving a need in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So I thank you for doing that because it's there's no substitute for getting to a point with another man where you feel comfortable just sharing your darkest secrets.
And a lot of times in my experiences, men will share their past. And I think, we've gotten to the point where maybe that's okay. But then they share their present. That's still hard for men, right? Because they want it to be in their past. And
Exactly. Yeah, it's great. Everyone wants to have a great testimony.
Right.
In fact, the worse the past, sometimes the better the
Right.
testimony. But no one wants to admit that they're dealing with something right now. Yeah, I hear you.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
Yep. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about your business. So, and I guess I have a particular interest because I started out in engineering and then I quit my job and flipped houses for 8 years. And
Wow. There you go.
And through that, I'd like to say I was not born again during that period of time. And there were a lot of temptations, and there isn't any business, but when you're kind of running your own business and you don't have the oversight of an employer, there's a lot of temptations, I think, in every business, but in real estate, as far as taking advantage of people who are down and out, using debt and financing in a way that doesn't align with biblical principles. So how have you managed some of those temptations, and how has your business changed over time as you had such a dramatic life change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's really good. So yeah, I started my business when I was about 27 and about 16, 17 years ago. I'm 43 now. And yeah, this is before I was a Christian, and yeah, I was just about making a lot of money. I didn't think a lot about the people. Honestly, I wanted to buy and sell houses. We did it a lot. And that's just what I was all about. And then obviously, a few years later, gave my life to Christ, and everything about had to change. And so now the way we do business, as far as flipping houses and the structure, and we buy and sell houses. I do rental properties. We do some of that creative financing, is what you've talked about. I built up the team, and we still do this today. And then there's a lot of players out there, real estate investors, that walk that fine line, and sometimes it can be hard, right? You're sitting at someone's doorstep, and you can, do certain things that is unethical. We do our best to live out the biblical principles, and to treat that person right, to treat that person like a person, number one, to be relational with that person, to see how can we help that person, what do they really need, and if it's not a deal for us, then we walk the other way. We've had to make certain decisions in our business that, and we're not perfect by any means, but we've had to do things in the past that maybe, and we didn't do this intentionally, but maybe we made a mistake on something. Maybe like one time this guy bought a house, and we advertised it as a certain aspect of the house that was wrong. And we made a mistake on that particular one. So we actually bought the house back from the guy. So we've had to make certain decisions like that. We do the best we can. We pray. We pray for our sellers. We pray for our buyers. We pray as a team. And we're always just thinking about how can we serve people. We're here to help people. And but there is that fine line of, yeah, is this the right thing to do? I mean, we are a business, and we have to make an income, but we try to put the people first, put God and the people first, and I think that's how we've been able to do this for so long, and to be relatively successful. We're definitely not the biggest fish in the sea, but I think that if people hear about our company, we want them to say, man, they treated us right. They treated us with integrity. And if they didn't treat us right, if we ever hear that, then we want to know, what did we do? How can we correct that? How can we be better? How can we make it right at the end of the day? Like, if you didn't feel that way. So those are some of the things. I don't know if that helped answer your question, but
No, it does.
yeah.
And I really appreciate your whole attitude. I feel like you have a very humble attitude and admit that, life is not always clean and neat. It's messy. And, we have to deal with some of the gray areas every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our faith it gets real, I guess,
Yeah.
in terms of how we respond to the messiness of life, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question before we wrap up, and it's
Yeah.
one I haven't asked in a while, but it has to do with balancing work and personal life in the context of a Christian man's
Mm-hmm.
walk. You mentioned earlier about how a ministry can become a mistress. Of course, our work can as well. How do you approach that whole question of balancing your life?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, a lot of podcasts will try to tackle that particular question, and I haven't done the best throughout the years of my life. I've had seasons of imbalance, and it's not always business either. It could be, the other way, where I've taken my hands off the wheel of the business. There's actually 3 years there. I had a CEO run the company, and I was spending a lot of time with my family and loving that. But I think I wasn't being as good as a steward of the business that God has given me, because I took my hands off the wheel too much. So you can actually, I think, go the other way, and then just pray through the seasons. But for me, yeah, I mean, I think it's just intentional, and just present. I mean, I think it all just boils down to, and this is the realization that I've probably came to, that everything that I have is surrendered to Him. I used to battle, even with like making too much money, right? I think business guys struggle. Christian business guys struggle with that. And it's like, hey, we got this certain number in our mind, and we're like, here's what I'm supposed to make as a good Christian man. If I make more than that, I think it's too much. If and we kind of battle with that. Like, how much is enough? Like, here's the questions that we talk about a lot. And in my mind too, and I've had to come to the conclusion that, like, it's all His. Like, my money is just all His, my family is just all His, and I'm just stewarding it, and He's given it to me. So, like, you know what? If I do make a lot of money, it's just all kingdoms. Like, I'm not going to change my lifestyle that much. It's all His. It's all the kingdoms. And if I can make a bigger impact with that money, that's great. So for me, like, I guess, and I'm just kind of rambling on, but I have to constantly check my gauges. I think, one guy did this one time. He's like, when you're driving a car, you have to just pay attention to your gauges. I am constantly reflecting, and I'm constantly evaluating, and it could be on a weekly, it could be on a monthly or a quarterly. Where am I at? With this season of my life, where am I at with God? Where am I at with my business? Where am I at with my family? And I am constantly having to adjust. Because there's certain seasons in your life that's going to need a lot more attention than other seasons of your life. And I think a lot of it just depends on that. Like, for me, like, I got 4 children. They're young. I even have some challenges with some of my children. So, like, they need a little bit more of my attention right now. But then sometimes, an employee leaves my business and I have to step in, and this happened recently too. And I'm like, okay. And I have to tell my wife, I'm like, hey, this needs a little bit of my attention. This isn't forever. It's just, I need to put my attention here a little bit more. I'm still going to be intentional at home. I'm still going to be present, but I need to shift my gauge a little bit, but we're going to shift it back, once it comes. So I don't think there's this ever perfect, work-life balance. It's just, a lot of it just depends on the season that you're in and just reflecting. I think that's where this whole part about getting by yourself, solitude, reflecting, what is God calling you to? What does he want? Where are you at? And then just coming back and adjusting to the season that you're in. So
I think that's a great answer. And some of the themes that you shared, I've heard when I've asked the question in the past. One of them is intentionality. I think that's big, is that you're doing things on purpose. And then another one is this idea of seasons, to think that you're going to have X percentage devoted to every part of your life consistently. That's just not realistic, right?
yeah,
So there's some ebb and flow, and sometimes you need, like when you're writing that book, I'm sure you had to let some things drop in order to get that done. And so
yeah.
I think that makes sense, and I think that's healthy.
Another thing I would just,
And-
and this is something that I've been trying to do is, can you try to integrate some of your passions or purposes with like your family? Because a lot of times we talk about work-life balance. A lot of times, right, this all belongs to God, but a lot of times the work-life balance becomes to work and family. I mean, most of the time it's like, this is what we're talking about, right? It's like,
Right.
and you're on this teeter-totter, like, oh, I'm working too much or I'm family too much, and that's what we're talking about. But I'm even thinking about like, how is there a way to integrate? So maybe there's an idea right now that if you're listening, maybe there's something that you can integrate your family into your passions or your ministry. Like, for example, even with Iron Deep, like, I talked about it being a mistress. It's like, I don't want it to be that. And so I'm thinking about, how can I integrate my family into this, right? This is something that I'm passionate about, but is there a way to do things? So we even talked about this next year, like we do some mission stuff and we do family missions trips with Iron Deep. So like that's a way to integrate family with the mission. Guys said, man, I'd love to bring my wife to something. So again, we're talking about, okay, is there a way to integrate an event with the wife, right? So just different things. Is there ways to integrate family with whatever you're doing? I started taking my 16, 17-year-old daughter to some work stuff with me, trying to integrate. We talked about rehabbing a house in my town and getting her and some of her friends to rehab this house with us, and I'll pay them to teach them. So again, these are just some of the ideas that I'm always trying to think about, like, can I integrate some of these things with my family that I'm also like doing for work? So
I think that's great. And as you were talking about that, it just reminded me of just the importance of integrating faith into everything we do. Like you said, it's all God. So from a financial perspective, that's true, but it's also true in terms of our activities. And I think I grew up kind of feeling like, our family we'd go to church on Sunday, but I didn't feel like our faith was an active part of our life. And so I kind of, at one point in my life, kind of rebelled against that, said, oh, I'm going to do things differently. But you can get into a real religious spirit and overreact in that sense too, where you're making everything, religious.
right.
And I think that the best way is for life to just be seamless in that sense, where our faith in God, our trust in God, our values, our principles, they just filtrate into every part of our life. And in that same sense, I could see how that would translate into blending of activities like you're talking about. So I think that's cool.
Yeah. No, definitely. No, I love it. No, that's awesome.
Well, I really have enjoyed this. If anyone wants to get your book or learn more about Iron Deep or reach out to you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so definitely. You can go to our website, it's irondeep.com. You can get the book on there as well, or Amazon is the best place to get the book. And the secret word within, the best way to help us is, to buy the book and then to leave a review on Amazon. If you're interested in Iron Deep, again, the website, it's we're putting some of the events that we're getting ready to have in 2024, which would include a men's awakening that we've talked about. As I mentioned, some of the guys want to do some sort of soulmate or couples type of event. We are doing a family missions type of event during the summer that families are included. We do Guatemala, so I've linked up with an organization in Guatemala called Transforming Futures, so they host us. And so if you're interested in any of those types of events, just to get to know us. So we also do the podcast, Iron Deep podcast as well. So any of those resources, love to just chat with you if you want to reach out on the website. Appreciate you so much for having me on, David. Thank you.
Well, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I just appreciate you, and I think just more men that just can get on board. My passion, I think, is really just men maybe that aren't in vocational types of ministry, but are in the marketplace, right? And that are living out their faith and they want to make an impact for the kingdom. I just love talking to men. So I'd love to talk to you, David, or anybody else out there about that particular topic. And I just say, go after it. Spend some time with the Father, see what he's calling you to. And it might not be something different than what you're doing right now, but how can you integrate it into your life and into your workplace? So thank you again.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Men at Work, I hope you've enjoyed this interview as much as I have. We just heard about Brett Snodgrass' journey being Spirit-led and living out his Christian faith through his work. Each of our journeys are unique, but hopefully you've heard something in this episode to inspire you and give direction for your own personal daily work life. You can find links and other information for this show at christianmenatwork.com. Until next time, have a great day and God bless.